G'day and welcome back to the Life Outside podcast. Each episode we share stories from outside to hopefully inspire you to get outside as well. My name is Cam Bostock and on today's episode I chat to Chris McCaffrey. Chris has spent more time outside in just the last few years than a lot of people do in their entire lifetime. He has a passion for both land-based and water-based expeditions, including crossing an ocean by rowboat and literally bikepacking around the globe. Chris shares all the ups and downs from some of his biggest adventures on this week's episode. We hope you enjoy. Chris, how you doing, mate?
Oh, I'm doing lovely. It's a beautiful day here in Boulder, and yeah, it's really nice. Psyched to be here.
Thanks for coming on to the show, man. Good to see your face. You've obviously been on a pretty incredible journey bikepacking around the world, and you've recently finished a couple of months ago. We crossed paths in person when you flew into Perth, where I'm from. When was that? Was that the beginning of last year, I want to say? Beginning of 2024?
It would have been, it was in like May or June, because it was right before you left for the PCT.
I left the PCT in April, so it had to be before that.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess it must have been April.
I think it was literally just before, like April, maybe 20th or something.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I came to Perth on April 5th. I flew to Perth, and then I ended up staying for 3 months in Perth.
Yeah. We'll definitely get into some of the ups and downs of your journey. I've been following you for quite some time. We have a mutual friend, James Allen, who introduced you to me. I should get him on the podcast, actually, because he's an incredible human being, done some crazy things. But he got me onto you, I think, towards maybe the start of your bikepacking adventures. So I've been following along on Instagram, and what a wild journey, man. What a wild journey.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, James spoke very highly of you. So it was really nice to connect in person for sure.
He speaks highly of everyone. He's just such a positive, upbeat dude. He's always got something nice to say. I love him so much. Yeah,
we could just spend this whole podcast talking about, this can just become a James podcast without him on it.
We could totally do that, and I'd be quite happy to. Some of the stories he shared with me, I just shared other people all the time because they're just that wild. But you probably have, a million stories just like that from this adventure, and you've been outdoors adventuring for a long time. Take me back to younger Chris. And how did you get into the outdoors? I know you ski, I know you climb, I know you bikepack, you do a lot of stuff. And obviously you live in Colorado, so there's plenty of all out there.
Yeah, the start would probably be sailing, actually.
Sailing, that's right.
Yeah, my dad grew up on Long Island Sound outside of New York City and comes from a line of sailors. My granddad was a sailor, and they had boats growing up on the bay, and so he was really keen to get me into sailing. I think I was 6 or 7, and we bought a little Walker Bay dinghy, single sail, and it was pretty much sailing ever since.
Wow.
And that's kind of the start of the outdoor world. I was always pretty competitive and played a lot of sports. I'm a pretty big guy and used to be bigger, and so it was primarily football in terms of the competitive sport as I got older, but it was primarily sailing as a kid until I was probably 15 or 16, racing dinghies and getting to travel around with my parents for sailing events. And that turned me onto the kind of waterman idea, the people that when you go to Hawaii and you hear of a waterman, the people that just do everything. They can surf, they can sail, they free dive, they spearfish, and that was really like a big draw for me. And so growing up, I loved going to these regattas out on the coast in the Southeast in America. And you'd race everybody all day, and then in the evenings go for a surf or go body surfing or swimming. And that was the initial draw.
Interesting. So you kind of grew up loving the ocean and water-based adventure, and I guess you've transitioned into land-based adventures as you've gotten older, but you still have that sort of first love, which is sailing and the ocean. I know you still sail a bit now, right?
Yeah, totally. It's definitely more the expedition stuff. We can get into that if you'd like.
I'd love to hear a bit hear a bit more about it, man, because I've like had zero experience sailing. I've never been on a sailboat. I haven't talked to many people who've done it. So yeah, fill me in.
Yeah, oh, sailing's just the best. I love it so much. But growing up was all dinghies, and so to kind of connect a little bit more, dinghies meaning small boat, just you in the boat, maybe one other person,
Hmm.
on a short course, racing multiple laps, multiple races each day, and then a regatta is you're racing for multiple days, maybe 7 or 8 races over the course of regatta, and you accumulate points, and that's how you win or lose. Now it's much more about the adventure and expedition stuff, which is kind of the theme overall. But yeah, I've always been still drawn to the ocean, but was really drawn to the mountains as well. So I moved out to
Mm.
Colorado for university, and just started climbing primarily and skiing a lot because the skiing's really good here, but was really just obsessed with climbing for a few years. And the sailing was a bit on the back burner other than these expeditions and going out to sea. And so the kind of bridge there was I'd been sailing through high school. And then after high school, me and a friend through hiked the Long Trail, if you're familiar, like runs the
Yeah.
length of Vermont. And that took us like 3 weeks. And I was sold. That was just like the coolest thing ever
Yeah.
to just go from point A to point B, like day in, day out. And then from then on, pretty much I was looking at ways to combine that with sailing, and so, or at least going out to sea. And so, oh, which to tell first? To connect, I guess we were just talking about James Allen. So I met James in a bar in Nuuk, Greenland, on the west coast of Greenland. And
Yeah, I
I
remember him
was,
telling me you the story. He was skiing across the country or something, right?
yeah, so James was up there on a ski traverse of the ice cap skiing west to east across Greenland. And I was up there because I had worked my way onto doing this like boat delivery crew position up from Canada across the Labrador Sea to Greenland. And that was just the coolest experience. I had so much fun on that trip. Um,
How long were you out to sea for?
yeah, so then I was at sea I think we were at sea a total of like just under 2 weeks. But we worked our way up from Newfoundland. We left from St. John's, sailed up to like the northern tip of Newfoundland, had an issue with the engine on the boat. So we had to sail in, get the engine fixed, and then we sailed across the Labrador, which was like 10 days, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Put in southern Greenland because we were sailing and there's icebergs everywhere and sea ice patches, and
Whoa.
it was snowing sideways like crazy blizzard. And we didn't want to push
Intense.
further north up into like the denser icebergs in the night, like in the storm. And so we pulled into Pomut in southern Greenland, which had a little bit less ice than Nuuk, and spent a day in Pomut waiting for the storm to settle, and then sailed up the coast up to Nuuk. So all in all, like a couple weeks at sea, and then another few weeks up in Greenland skiing. But yeah, I love that side of sailing now. It's the big draw for sure.
Incredible. Do you have more of these sailing trips planned? Because it's an interesting dichotomy. I think most people that are really into sort of outdoor adventure have a bias towards maybe like ocean or water-based sports or like mountain and land-based sports. Like I definitely lean towards the land-based stuff. I love the mountains and I love the forest and I love, obviously I love through hiking and that kind of stuff. Even though I live on the coast where surfing is a thing and sailing is a big thing here, kite surfing, all that kind of stuff, I've never really felt drawn to it, and I always lean towards hiking and climbing mountains. Seems like you've got maybe a 50-50 split there. You love it both.
Oh, I love both for sure. It's funny, skiing is definitely my main thing now. And in many ways, it feels like it all relates. Skiing is just frozen water, and I love the water. So, of course, I love frozen water and
Makes
snow.
sense.
I like climbing frozen waterfalls, and I like looking at rivers and waterfalls when they're not frozen as well. And so, yeah, I love both of those things. On the plan right now is I don't have anything major ocean wise, but definitely the biggest expedition I've ever done was at sea, potentially arguably bigger than the around the world, which I'm realizing we may have
Really?
never talked about before.
No,
Um,
I haven't heard much of this, man. Um, what was this big ocean expedition?
so in 2021, myself, my like best mate, this guy Ryan Cosgrove, another outdoor adventure guy we met guiding up in Alaska, and Raymond Byrne, a guy that I'd met like through the internet, took a rowboat from New York City to Ireland.
Whoa. How?
That's yeah, so that's the short of it. The longer answer is a very long answer.
Tell me. Give it to me.
Yeah, we ended up not actually being successful. We rode out of New York City, and after about a week at sea, we realized our electronic system was not resilient enough for the severity of storms. We'd already been in a tropical storm, and we just couldn't maintain power with no sun and being so reliant on electronics for navigation, for communication.
So did you have like a solar panel? Is that why you needed the sun?
Yep, we had a solar panel, 24-foot
rowboat.
So 24 feet, which is what, 7 meters and some change?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And small cabin in the back. You can't quite sit fully up in it, but you can lay down and you sleep in there, and then storage in the front and 2 rowing positions in the middle.
Wow.
So we'd been in a storm, realized our electronic system wasn't going to work, and we were near Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And so we rowed north and got close enough to just get a pickup from like a small tugboat. And they towed us into Cape Cod to Falmouth. And there we pull in to this harbor, and there's just super expensive mega yachts and beautiful sailboats and stuff in this harbor. And there's no slip for us. And so we're just like, Christ, what are we going to do? So we tie up next to the sidewalk, basically. There's a concrete boardwalk in town that runs along the perimeter of the harbor. And so we just tie up next to it and get out. And then the next day, the harbor master is like, you have to leave. And we were like, where are we going to go? And he's like, I don't care. Like, back to sea. Like, I don't care. You've got to go. And so we realized we were in a bit of a pickle. But that's when, like all these things on a lot of adventures, and I'm sure you've experienced as well, things just kind of sort themselves if you let them. And so
we say the trail provides. I guess the sea provides as well.
Totally, 100%. And so this couple that had been following our row on Instagram saw on our Garmin InReach tracker that we were in Falmouth. And they DM'd us on Instagram saying, is your tracker broken? Why are you in Falmouth? We told them the brief story. And they responded with, where are you staying? We said, we got a room at this hotel. And we get a phone call from the guy a bit later. And he just said, you're checking out of the hotel. I'm sending someone with a car. We live in Falmouth. And they gave us a car and a place to stay in their lovely home on a lake just off the coast. And
wow,
another gentleman who owns a hauling business came and said that he would haul our boat out. And well, that was great, but then we didn't have anywhere to put it because we couldn't pay to keep it on land anywhere. And he was just, no, it's fine. I'll just put it in my yard. And so we put the boat in this random guy's yard who hauled it there for us, and we had a place to stay, and then that was the short of the beginning, the end of the beginning, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Before you continue, why did you guys decide to do this, rowing across the ocean from country to country? That I mean, as someone who has never done anything like that, to me that just seems like a death wish. And like you say, you got caught in a storm and your electronics didn't work, stopped working, and all this kind of stuff. Like, this is super dangerous, right, and risky. You guys just had the confidence. You're like, well, we'll just do it.
Sorry, might be telling things a bit out of order here, but
that's right. Give us some context if you need to.
I'm a pretty risk averse person, I would say.
Okay.
Which I'm sure people may hear this and disagree. But
I already disagree.
I really like the experience of taking something that feels so just impossible, immense, so dangerous, maybe the wrong word, but just like it's just not a thing you could do. And
Hmm.
I love the experience of kind of solving it, if you will. And I love that feeling of adventure, for lack of a better word, where you're just fully out there, both physically, but also when you've had the experiences that create the context for being like so far out there. I love that experience. And so I'd heard about ocean rowing, a much more common route, which in hindsight, probably should have done, is to go the other way, go from Portugal to Antigua. Probably 50 boats do that a year. And there's an event for it. The reason that's easier is it's A, shorter, B, the weather patterns are better, um, and C, the currents are a lot more stable.
The currents would be the big thing, wouldn't they?
Exactly. Realistically, with ocean rowing, your arm strength is less than half of it. It's about rowing yourself into a position where you can take advantage of wind and currents.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
But in terms of wanting to do this specifically, this was post COVID, or during COVID, like the heat of COVID, and I wanted something just to change. I was pretty depressed, I would say, during COVID, like living by myself in an apartment, not really seeing anyone. I definitely didn't have the best time, for sure. I tried to go back to college, but it was online and I just couldn't do it. Like, I couldn't do the online school. I couldn't learn anything. I hated just sitting in my room. And so I was looking for a drastic change and started looking for a big expedition to do.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You grew up in the outdoors, you grew up doing all these crazy activities, and then, COVID hits. And for a lot of people, it was like that. It was like you're used to just being active and adventuring and all this stuff. And now you're just stuck inside a bedroom or inside an office, or you're, working from home, whatever it is. And it's just such a radical shift for a lot of people. And I can imagine for you, that was just like night and day. So I guess it now makes sense to me why some crazy idea like this would pop into your mind and you'd pursue it, because you were like, anything is just better than sitting at home all day.
Totally, for sure. But yeah, for sure. And a lot of that was coming from I guess, yeah, like a privilege where obviously COVID hit everyone quite hard, but hit a lot of people a lot harder than me. I was mostly just bored, but my parents were supporting me in college. I had like all the resources I could ever want just to like live my life. I just didn't really have any drive. I cared about graduating, but it wasn't, school has never been like the biggest thing in my life. I've never found fulfillment in it. And I just needed something properly fulfilling. And that's when I started really deep diving into the ocean rowing stuff. And then I met Ray through Facebook. Ray is a bit older than me. I'm 25 now. Ray is 3 or 4 years. So what did we do the row 3 years ago? And he turned 40 on the row. So Ray's now 43, which primarily meant that Ray was in a financial position where he could buy an ocean rowing boat, which was the crux for me.
Yeah.
And my
You're like,
parents,
yeah, I'll tag along.
exactly. And my parents really helped me out, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without their support overall, just in life. But really was Ray owned a boat, and I didn't own a boat, and I wanted to go have just an absolute quest. And so I started chatting with Ray. We had a phone call, talked on the phone for probably like an hour. I was standing out in the back garden at my favorite cafe in Boulder. It's called Trident. And talking to Ray, and he was like, okay, I've got these other guys lined up. Ray had already tried 2 times before, but things had
Wow.
fallen through, whether it had been the timing, the boat wasn't ready, or issues with his crew. And so it was really Ray's project. And he had 2 other guys lined up. And so I was kind of put on, not the back burner, but I was a reserve for sure. And that's what he told me. I kind of knew I wasn't, just based on our conversation, but that's what he told me. And a couple days later, he called me and he was like, are you in? Like, if you're in, let's do this. And my caveat was that if I was going to do this, I needed to be able to bring my buddy Ryan as like our third crew.
Okay.
And so I had Ryan call Ray. They chatted, got along, and that was kind of the beginning. And we were all in.
So you do this first stint where you get turned around, and then what happened next?
Yeah, so we'd rode. Oh, what is that? 500 miles or something? It may be less than that, and it's somewhere in a few hundred miles from New York to Cape Cod. So we'd moved ourselves closer to Ireland. The reason for going New York to Ireland is Ray is Irish and grew up in Ireland, and we were going to row to his mom's house in Dungarvan in Southern Ireland. And my family lineage is Irish, and there's like a pretty strong Irish connection. So we're really excited about that. We'd moved ourselves closer, and so we're in Cape Cod. A little bit late in the season now, but one of those things where it was sort of now or never. Everyone had taken time off work. We were in position. Let's just go for it. It was, even though it was July by this point, and ideally you'd be leaving closer to May. So we push off from Cape Cod early July and row out into the Gulf Stream, really. We ended up hooking north of the Gulf Stream. We were using a weather router. His name's Stokey. He's a pretty iconic navigational and weather forecaster. And his reasoning for us going north of the Gulf Stream was the Gulf Stream intensifies everything, which means when the weather's perfect, it's 5 times as perfect. You're just screaming along 100 miles a day easily when the weather's perfect in the Gulf Stream. When the weather's bad in the Gulf Stream, it's 5 times worse. The Gulf Stream being just this massive current that flows up the east coast of the Americas. And when storms and big swells end up in the Gulf Stream, because there's so much force from the current, they just double, triple in size. And so in order to avoid that, we went north. This was maybe the wrong decision, maybe the right decision, but it's what we made. And so we ended up south of the Bay of Fundy in this crazy fog. The fog from the Bay of Fundy rolls out for literally like 1,000 miles out to sea. And so we spent a couple weeks just in the fog. Pretty glassy, weren't moving super fast because we didn't really have any help from the weather. And that was a really trippy experience. It's the middle of the day and you can see 30 meters.
Wow.
Yet you know you're 1,000 kilometers from the nearest bit of land.
That gives me anxiety just listening to you is that scary at all to you? Or is it just like you've been out in the water so much?
It wasn't scary, I would say. I think that, we could talk more about fear later in the conversation as well, if you'd like, but I feel like it's a type of thing where in a lot of these endeavors, like close calls or accidents and things happen so quickly that by the time you react with fear, they've already passed. And so the fear is now irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And so concern, for sure, we were very concerned, but it's about trying to be correctly concerned, if that makes sense. And
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And the correct concerns were getting off route, getting blown back like 500 kilometers because the wind shifts, and being hit by like a tanker, which was a pretty...
Because you can't see anywhere. They can't see you
Exactly.
either, right? Yeah.
So we have this system called AIS, which shows your position to other boats with AIS, and we can see them on our map. But it's a lot of electronics to rely on when you can't really see anything.
Yeah.
And occasionally during the night, we would hear these fog horns going off from boats near us. And that was just so trippy.
Wow.
Because sometimes they sound like they're right on top of you when maybe they're really realistically nowhere near you. It's just a giant boat with a really loud foghorn. And so that was pretty intense for sure. But it was like this really mystical experience. And then we rode out onto the Grand Banks, and we had some fog there still, but it would kind of come and go. And if you're familiar with the movie Perfect Storm,
yeah,
which So we were like right over their location where they sunk.
Jeez, yeah, the the waves in that movie are kind of big.
So the reason the waves get so big there is you're in the middle of the ocean, literally 1,000 kilometers to the nearest land, if not more.
Yeah,
And it goes from being 800 meters, 1,000 meters deep, to being 100 meters deep.
really,
And all of this energy of the storms hit that uplift, and the waves get a lot shorter in period and a lot taller and a lot more aggressive. And so we didn't really want to hang out there for sure. We had a couple big storms in the Grand Banks, which was a engaging experience for sure.
what's the protocol when either you know a storm's coming or a storm hits you? Do you bunker down? Do you keep rowing? What's the plan? Like, obviously, you got to stay afloat. Is there water coming into the boat at all? Like, what's happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The boat is theoretically watertight. You can seal the hatches, and that means that when you capsize, the bottom of the boat is heavier than the top of the boat. So when you capsize, now the bottom is up top and it'll pull you back around. So as long as the doors are sealed, you should be relatively okay, which we tested that later and we're still here. So I guess it works.
Did you
But
capsize at all? Any of these storms?
in the storm later on, we sort of capsized. We ended up upside down, but we came back the same direction we went over.
Okay.
But yeah, generally the program is to throw out either a sea anchor, which is a big inflatable parachute, basically, and that goes out the front of the boat and it keeps your bow pointed at the wind. And so when the storm winds and waves are blowing us away from Ireland, we would put the sea anchor out, and that keeps you stable and it keeps you from being blown back too far. Now, when the storm is working for us and pushing us toward Ireland, we use a thing called a drogue. It goes out the back of the boat, and it's basically a super heavy chain with a long tube on it, and that keeps the back of the boat into the wind, but allows the boat to move forward more. Basically, it just slows you down. So we used those tactics. Actually, the coolest day was we had a really weird day with winds blowing in our face, but it wasn't a big storm or anything. It was a relatively normal day, but the winds were just blowing too strong for us to row into them. And we were in the Grand Banks. It's properly shallow. And so we threw out like our actual anchor and just put the anchor like into the sea floor. And that was really cool experience being on actual anchor. And then, of course, we were jumping off and going swimming, and some dolphins came by and porpoises and stuff.
Wow.
And that was really cool.
Incredible.
But yeah, I guess in order to keep the row talk from taking like 3 hours, we ended up rowing off the Grand Banks, got some great storms, got some big days in. We were a bit behind schedule, but as the season pushed on, the storms got more frequent, but the storms also were working more in our favor. So we started going a lot quicker. And it would have been, September now? Proper storm season. Early September, I think. And we get the call on the satellite phone from our weather router that Hurricane Henry has been intensifying going up the American East Coast. And it's going to clobber us. And so we got that notification maybe 3 or 4 days out. Not really anything you can do about it. And so we just did our best to make sure everything was tied down, that our protocols were in place. And we knew it wasn't going to be a Category 5 or anything, but it was going to be a Cat 1, Cat 2 hurricane. And we knew it was going to be an intense experience. And so we kind of bunkered down. We waited for the initial storms, the initial winds to hit us, and rode through it for as long as we could, and then went into that protocol we were just talking about. All three of us were in the cabin, and things were definitely intensifying. We had the drogue out, but it was blowing us the right direction. Like, we were actually ripping. It's funny, I remember we had a call scheduled with one of our sponsors, and it's a big drink company. And we actually took the call on the satellite phone during this storm.
in the cabin.
In the cabin. And executives were loving it, and we were loving it, to be honest. It was so fun. I look back on that so fondly. Just there, like with my best mates, like in this basically roller coaster ride. And then it got a bit more intense and a bit windier. And I was pretty seasick because you're just getting thrown around in this cabin. And it probably was 5 a.m. Ryan was on watch. So we'd always make sure one of us was awake just to kind of monitor the situation. And Ryan was on watch. I was asleep on the port side of the boat. Ray was asleep on the starboard side of the boat. And I remember waking up to, am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I just remember really distinctly waking up to Ryan's voice being like, "Oh, fuck." And I remember having a couple seconds being like, hey, he's probably overreacting. Like, what can he possibly see? The issue was Ryan was looking out the porthole. And so what he saw was, rather than a wave coming from behind us, a wave coming at us on an angle, and a giant one. We're talking,
whoa.
Looking back at the historic record, the largest waves of that storm were in the 18-meter range.
18 meters.
Yeah, so 55 feet, which is, somewhere in there. 15 meters?
That's unfathomable.
In that range.
That's huge.
So whether it was one of those, or I would have assumed we didn't see anything that big while we were at sea. That's just looking back later on. But this was probably a big wave, probably like a 20, 25 footer, which is 8 meters. And we took it right on the port side. So I was asleep. I remember waking up Ryan being like, "Oh, fuck." And having a few seconds, I remember so distinctly this 3-second period of, it's probably fine. Ryan will sort it out, whatever it is. And then the next thing I knew, I was just airborne because the wave had broke and the whitewater had hit the side of the boat. And the boat had rolled over, but it had rolled over with such force that me being on the port side of the boat had gotten launched, physically launched into the air. And I was then quite awake. And I was on
You were
top of
obviously in the cabin, right?
Yeah, we're in the cabin.
In the cabin,
I ended up on the ceiling on top of Ray. And then the boat rocks back over. And you have this moment of I was like, "Oh my God, Ray, are you okay? Did I hurt you? Whatever. Is everyone okay?" And then we look around and Ryan is just totally gripped. And what had happened was we had a Jackery battery we took the electronic system and ran the boat batteries into the Jackery, and then we charged phones and stuff off that. And it was just backup battery. We could use the Jackery, or we could plug it into the boat electronics. But anyway, we had this Jackery battery in the cabin with us. And the capsize, the motion of capsizing had been so violent that it had thrown this, probably was 30 pounds, 12 kilos or something. It had thrown this large battery at an extreme velocity across the cabin. And Ryan was sitting up against the wall, and it had hit the wall, right next to his face.
Wow.
And so in action, it's one of those things where you need to be concerned about the right thing. I was so concerned about capsizing that I had never considered that an object in the cabin was going to become a lethal projectile.
Yes. Yep.
And so that was quite engaging. And then we
engaging. That's an interesting way to put it. You all came out unscathed though, despite
unscathed
that pretty hectic experience. Wow.
And then that was very exciting for the next maybe 18 hours, because as the waves get properly big, they sound like trains. And so you're just hearing through the thin cardboard kind of material of the boat this train noise getting louder and louder. And it's difficult to judge at what point it's next to you, because either it's a massive wave that's really loud and is still a few seconds out, or it's a smaller wave that's not as loud, but it's right next to you. So you're kind of braced all the time, just hearing these trains coming and coming and coming.
Do you sleep at all during a
I slept great.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where when there's not really much to do and one of the other guys is awake, then I'll just go to sleep, because then I'll be much more alert when it's my shift. Or you take some seasickness medication, and then that makes you quite tired. Yeah, we were. That was pretty engaging for sure. And then towards the end of the storm, which was quite helpful, we heard this giant crash and then this kind of cracking, ripping sound. Ryan opens the back hatch and sticks his head out because of the motion had gotten kind of weird. And we realized that we had lost the drogue. The metal
Oh,
chain had just been shredded by the storm. And a wave had hit it so hard that it had ripped our rudder and our steering system fully off the back of the boat.
like
And
detached?
so, yeah, just it was all gone. There was nothing. There was like just a flimsy bit of the
Oh,
attachment point left.
oh no.
And so Ray jumps to action, throws on a life jacket, jumps out, and throws our sea anchor. I think I was holding onto Ryan's legs at this point, but Ryan comes back in the cabin, closes it. You've got the door open. Ray throws the sea anchor, jumps back in the cabin, lock the door, and then we let the sea anchor take hold, which we talked about earlier. It keeps the bow into the
Yeah.
storm. The issue with that is we had lost our rudder. And so with nothing in the water on the back of the boat was just swinging back and forth off the point of the sea anchor. So then you get hit by a wave and you would, like a boomerang almost, you would just get flung around the focal point being the anchor attachment.
Yeah.
And that was less fun. Quite an unnerving sensation, but it worked out. And so we made it through the storm. Ryan is a brilliant woodworker, carpenter, and we had brought a section of wood that could either be used to replace a centerboard or replace a rudder, assuming we would have lost the rudder in some way that didn't involve losing the entire steering system. But Ryan, being Ryan, built a new one, like out of scraps, basically.
Wow.
Built like a new steering attachment system, just brilliant. And so,
So say you didn't have that option and Ryan wasn't so brilliant, what would the go be with no rudder? Would you just be stuck? You'd have to call in
yeah,
help?
you'd be
Or...
totally stuck and you'd have to get rescued because you can't keep the boat going straight. But we did have a Ryan, which was quite nice. I remember this amazing experience of Ryan is bolting the rudder on and Ray is holding onto Ryan's legs, but Ryan needs to get deeper out of the back of the boat. But I mean, falling overboard is basically a death sentence. So Ryan's hanging out the back. Ray is holding on to Ryan. And I just hear, I forget what I was doing, but it wasn't particularly useful at the time, I don't think. But Ray is like, grab me, because Ryan wanted to go lower. And so then I'm hanging Ray out the back of the boat, who's hanging Ryan out the back of the boat. And we built a new rudder and started rowing again. But unfortunately, things had gotten really wet during the storm, and our electronic system had started playing up again. They worked again for maybe 5 days until we took a weird wave through the cabin. I remember I was on watch, and it was just we had this tiny sliver in the door open, because otherwise you get condensation, and then everything gets wet from the condensation. And so I had the door open slightly. We took a wave at a perfect angle where some of the water got through, and I had gotten up, taken some towels and stuff, and dried it up as best I could. And then I remember Ray got on shift and he was like, oh, there's standing water. I was like, yeah, I know, but what are we going to do? And then the next day, we let the sun come up. Next day, we start to deal with it. Seemed fine. And then later that day, the electronic system just died.
Right.
And at that point, we had a decision to make for sure. And we used the remaining battery, started using the remaining battery in our InReach, which is a satellite messaging device, to message our contact at the Canadian Coast Guard and ask their advice. Because at this point, we were pretty dang close to Ireland, relatively speaking. And so turning back seemed really annoying. But yeah, so we messaged the contact from the Canadian Coast Guard, told him what was up, that no electronic system means no radio, no AIS, no way to contact other boats. And no way to charge that InReach. It was just going to eventually die while we were still at sea.
Yeah.
And they said, there's another big storm coming. We think that you guys need to be evacuated. I had slightly assumed that meant the Coast Guard was going to come get us, but apparently the storm that was following that big hurricane was another hurricane strength storm. And the Coast Guard wasn't going to be able to come get us because it was too dangerous. And we were still pretty far out to sea.
So if the Coast Guard's not coming, who is?
Yeah, so we had a bit of a self-rescue where they put us in contact with an oil tanker, and the oil tanker basically pulls up near us. We row up to the side of the oil tanker. They've lowered down a literal basket, like a rope basket. We throw our valuable stuff into the basket, jump in, and that was a touch sketchy because we're like in this, it's, big wave still. We're banging off the side of this oil tanker, like swinging out in this basket. I had to leave the boat, which was a real bummer. They haul us up onto the deck of this oil tanker, and then the trip was over and we didn't succeed. Well, we didn't reach Ireland, but we definitely succeeded in having one heck of an adventure. Yeah.
Yeah. So you left the boat and it's gone.
Actually, we know where it is, funnily enough.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it washed up on shore in France, but it had been like pretty badly damaged, obviously.
Right. But, okay. So yeah. It's still out there somewhere.
Yeah, it is in a boatyard in Brest, I think.
This whole time you're telling the story, I am just like wishing you had like a 360 camera on the top of the cabin or something on the boat, because some of the stuff you're explaining like would make, this is like movie worthy stuff. It's crazy, like rebuilding a rudder and attaching it while holding on to each other and all these crazy storms and getting flipped. It's just what an incredible journey. Do you think you'll go back for redemption?
Well, so that, I don't know how much time we have and if maybe we need to do a second episode.
Maybe we do.
I felt like that redemption was the ride.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ride, because that's how I started following you and that's what I know you for. You bike packed across planet Earth, which is just as mind-blowing as trying to row across this ocean, all these things. I'm blown away that you're 25 years old. I forgot that you were younger than me, and you've done some pretty incredible things. It's funny, I think since I've started following you and your journey on the bike, I've come across a lot of other bikepackers doing sort of similar things. There's people just riding across continents and up and down the Americas and riding around the world, like similar to what you did. And it's super cool, and it's kind of getting me interested in maybe getting on the bike at some point, because what I love about the bike is you can't go everywhere that a hiker can go, obviously. Legs are a bit better at going up sort of technical terrain and mountains and whatnot, especially in the backcountry, but bikes can just travel so far each day, especially when you're following roads. And you had some huge days on the bike. I remember you posting sometimes, and just, incredible kilometers, incredible miles each day, pushing to get to a certain town or city or whatever it was. And I just love following your sporadic updates as you were riding, because you're just so raw on Instagram, and you just like tell her how it is, and you're just like so high on life and loving every second. And then there's crappy moments as well. But bring back to the start of the bike, because how long were you on it for? How long were you riding around the world?
So it ended up taking me from June 2023 until November 2024. So like 16 months.
16 months riding. And you started in the US, is that right?
Yeah, so I started in Boulder, Colorado, where I've been living since 2018.
Yeah.
And I started from Full Cycle Bike Shop, which is this local bike shop that helped me out with building my bike and some stuff like that. And Russ, the owner of Full Cycle, Russ, if you're listening to this, thank you for your support. But Russ, the owner of Full Cycle, was also a big bike packer and stuff. And so it was a really good place for me to kind of have home base getting ready for this trip, and then a good place to leave from, because they've got a cafe and bar and social scene there. So yeah, I rode out from Full Cycle to ride around the world. And I do think it's difficult to tell one without the other. Like the row feels really tied to the ride in many ways. Like I would probably have not done the ride around the world had we actually rode into Ireland.
Interesting. Because so it was almost like the sequel and like a different medium of adventure, but that was sort of like, I'm going to complete this instead.
Yeah, I wanted to have that. Yeah, I really wanted that finish for sure. And I was 23 when I left. And I really wanted to have that kind of crowning achievement. Sounds kind of weird. But from a career standpoint, and as someone in the outdoor industry. I really wanted to have that thing I can look back on as being like, wow, like that was a real both. I don't like the phrase crowning achievement because it feels more like a stepping stone.
I was going to say there's going to be some bigger and better things you're going to do throughout your life, but I totally get it. It's like this thing that you have that you can say, you know, I did that, and it's a story you can tell for the rest of your life, and that kind of
Totally.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both that you can, I guess, tell to others, but for me, it was more about like a story I can like tell myself. But we can talk more about that as well.
Prove what you're capable of, and you know,
yeah, exactly.
what you can achieve. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. So, did you have a route planned out when you left Colorado?
Yes,
roughly, or
yeah, I had quite a route plan. It went almost none % how I planned.
Yeah,
but
which
yeah,
is
I
probably
guess
to be expected. Yeah.
Oh, totally to be expected. But yeah, I guess just kind of start the framework I was riding within is the Guinness World Records definition of riding around the world, which originally what I was writing to is the like original standard that they had set when they did this like around the world race that like 10 people participated in like 2005, which was 15,000 miles. You have to ride in a continuous direction. You have to actually circumnavigate, and you have to hit opposite points on the world. So for me, that was like Europe and Australia. They've since updated it to 18,000 miles. And so my kind of loose trajectory was I wanted to ride somewhere 15 to 18,000 miles. I wanted to have I wanted to feel like I wasn't skipping out on anything, but I wanted to leave it loose enough that even if things went wrong, I could still create a route for myself on the go that I would feel proud of and would give me the experience I was looking for and hit the metrics that I'd set out to ride within. And so, yeah, that was kind of the general plan. What did go to plan was the first part, more or less to plan, was the first part, riding from Boulder to Newfoundland. I had done the sailing trip we talked about briefly from Newfoundland before. I love Newfoundland. It's one of the coolest places in the world. And I highly recommend anyone listening. Like Newfoundland is just an incredible place. If you can go visit. Why is it so incredible?
Because I'm always interested in going to new places.
Well, a few different reasons. They have a really, really cool through hike in Newfoundland that looks amazing following the coast. But it's just an outdoor haven, really. It's super raw, super rugged. And when I'd been there before, I felt so welcomed by the community there. Me and my friend from Colorado I'd brought on that sailing trip. We'd gone to the climbing gym in St. John's, like the main city. And immediately we're meeting like really cool other climbers. And they were like, oh, like let's exchange numbers. Like we'll go get dinner or coffee. And I'm still really good friends with a couple of them. And yeah, Newfoundland's just an amazing place. Super raw, super rugged, big cliffy mountains right up against the sea. And culturally, it's really unique. They still have an Irish accent there. The Newfie accent is very Irish with a mix of Portuguese in there. And yeah, Newfoundland's cool. So I knew I wanted to go to Newfoundland. It's also St. John's, or the lighthouse east of St. John's is the easternmost point in North America. So it looks quite nice on a map. And so, yeah, I set off from Boulder. A few of my friends joined me to ride the first like 20 miles out of Boulder. And then that very first day was kind of a funny story. It was maybe 4 p.m. As you leave the mountains, Colorado gets to be these kind of high plains, kind of as you'd imagine like Kansas or the American Midwest. It becomes like that quite quickly. And so you get these big, if you hear about the tornadoes or if you've seen that new movie Twisters.
Yep.
That's the type of place we're talking about. And that very first day, I got caught in a horrible, like really scary storm. Funnily enough, I think it was scarier than anything that happened on the row, both in terms of how scared I was and how dangerous it was. Because I was watching the storm.
You don't have any shelter on the bike, right? So that's also a little bit sketchier.
Totally. Exactly. So I was just in these fields, no trees, and I was hearing this giant thunder and watching this lightning storm building behind me. And it just washed over me. It started with a pretty heavy rain and then hailstorm. It was hailing really hard, like really painful.
This is day one.
Day one. And I set up my tent like on the side of this farm road. and just crawled in to get out of the hail. And the lightning was and thunder was just everywhere. And I
Wow.
called my dad, 'cause he still had cell service. I was like, Dad, are you seeing the storm? Like, I couldn't get the radar to load. I was like, can you tell me if it's going to get worse? He was like, it's right over you. Like, it'll be, it'll get better. And I talked to him for a little bit, which helped. I thought about like waving down a car and like trying to get to shelter. But in the end, I just like sat in my tent and hoped I didn't get struck by lightning.
Yeah.
That was a pretty intense experience. And then I rode like 100 miles in the first day. It's like 160K. And I went to this hotel. And I remember I got in the elevator and I just like bawled my eyes out. I was like so overwhelmed. It was so scary and so intense. And like the magnitude of what I had set out to do was really.
Yeah, you definitely want. It's huge. I feel like you want to ease into an adventure like that. You're going to be out for a year or more, and you start off with this like crazy storm and this super scary sort of situation. It's full on.
Yeah, it was super full on. And yeah, in the spirit of easing into it, I rode for another couple days, but was still having these like afternoon, evening storms. It's like I didn't want to camp because the storms are so brutal. So I was trying to ride to hotels, but there's not that many hotels. So then you're doing shorter days. And I actually called my dad, who was living in Boulder at the time and has a camper van. And I was like, hey, do you want to help me out with this next, week so I could get through like the heart of the Midwest? So he drove out, and that was really helpful. That was only part of he helped me a bit in America. I was by myself, unsupported for the rest of it. But having him there was really nice because it meant that I could just ride as far as I wanted. And then if I was going to be like killed by a tornado, then I could just get in the car and like drive to hotel.
Yeah.
And then he just drove me back to where I'd stopped the night before. But yeah, so carried on like that to Newfoundland.
So you reached Newfoundland, and then where did you fly to? I guess Europe was next.
Yep, I flew to Paris, and that was really cool. I've never really been to mainland Europe. I went when I was a kid with my parents, but it's been a long, long time. And so I really enjoyed hanging out in Paris. And then that next section is just France and Central Europe is just like heaven on earth for bike touring. They have this thing called the Eurovelo network, which is this established network of trails. These like mostly paved, but maybe 50-50 paved and dirt paths that are not even related to a road. It's like a bike network, but it connects like all of Europe pretty much.
Wow.
So I was riding down this Eurovelo route south from Paris, following these canals, and there's bike packers everywhere. There's all these municipal campgrounds in these small towns. So you go to camp at, this beautiful town next to the canal and pull into the campground, and there's 15 cyclists. And then they're like, oh, like, we're the campground host is bringing like a bottle of wine from the vineyard next door. Like, let's hang out this evening. And then you're hanging out with people from all over the world in these campgrounds. And I rode with some fantastic people through that time. You meet up, go have breakfast the next morning, and then roll out together for a day. And they head off somewhere else, and there's someone new to ride with the next day. And that was just magic.
So it's like it's a very big thing in Europe, bikepacking.
Oh, huge.
So people are doing like shorter trips, longer trips across countries. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite easy to do like a 5-day trip there as well, which is really cool.
Okay.
Because then you can just take the train back from wherever you end up.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's like reminds me of through hiking. You get to a campsite and you just get to meet all these incredible people that you'd never seen before. But it's just like the through hiking of the bikepacking world, Europe. It sounds like just people everywhere doing the same thing, maybe different routes, but you kind of all end up seeing each other at campsites and that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. I was going to ask you actually how you found the community on your through hike.
On the Pacific Crest Trail, it was incredible. Yeah. It was the best part of the whole experience was not only the on-trail community of other hikers that I met from all across the world, but also the like trail angel community and the people that would help you and you'd meet along the way. Just incredible because the PCT is so historic and quite old in context to through hiking trails around the world. All the towns near the trail know about it, and they see hikers hitchhiking all the time and that kind of stuff. So just super friendly and incredible people everywhere. I loved it so much.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah,
As an added bonus when I'm like creating content as well, because people follow along and they're like, oh, I live in this town which is near the trail, and when you get close then come stay with us or whatever, which I'm sure you might have had a few experiences like that as well.
yeah, totally. Yeah, that's super cool. It definitely, my experience in France made me think a lot about the through hiking, and just how cool that is from a social standpoint. Because moving on from there was a lot of time by myself. But yeah, so I rode from France into Italy over the Alps, rode to Turin, crazy heat wave in Italy. It got pretty brutal. I ended up taking a train for like, what was it, 180 kilometers or something, south to the Mediterranean just to get out of the heat. And then I just rode around the Mediterranean. And that was lovely. And then went into Eastern Europe, Slovenia, just another paradise for bike packing, which I didn't expect, but I met some other cyclists there. Slovenia is an amazing country. And then I rode through Eastern Europe, had a bit of troubles with like mechanicals and stuff, but more or less worked it out until I was like through Serbia, broke a wheel, couldn't fix it, couldn't find a new one. And so I just flew over Bulgaria to Istanbul and continued on from there.
That's the problem with bike packing in comparison to something like through hiking, is the mechanical issues can just make or break your adventure. Like I've done a little bit of bike packing. I rode the Mundabidi Trail here in Western Australia, which was about 1,000 kilometers. And yeah, even on a short trip like that, it was less than 2 weeks, I still had a few issues with my bike. And as someone who hadn't ridden much before that, it was like just a nightmare. And thankfully we had support because we were close to home and we could get a few things fixed. But I can imagine being in a completely foreign continent, country, city or whatever, and having your wheel break or, your chain break, your chain snap or whatever it is, getting these things fixed is probably pretty challenging and quite stressful.
Yeah, it was quite stressful. I wanted obviously to have a continuous line. And so I found this tiny bike shop in Serbia, and they didn't have the parts I needed, but we kind of made like some spare spokes work. And then I carried 20 spare spokes and would break a spoke every maybe hour. And then I would just change it and I keep riding until eventually the like whole wheel just like cracked. And then, yeah, I posted, I mean, you're much more familiar with the social media stuff than I am, but I had posted on my social media and I was like, I don't know what to do. And like every single person who messaged me was like, dude, what are you doing? Just fly to Istanbul. And so, because I was trying to figure out if I could rent a car and drive to Italy and pick up a wheel and drive back to Serbia. And so I just flew to Istanbul, which ended up probably being a good decision.
Okay, so you got the wheel fixed, and then
got the wheel fixed, and then
next into Asia or the Middle East.
Yeah, so I rode through Istanbul, up to the Black Sea and along the shore of the Black Sea through Turkey, which was incredible, just incredible.
Yeah,
definitely a bit tense at times. The roads occasionally not very good, and there's some big tunnels that are scary to navigate. And I eventually decided I just wasn't going to take that risk. And so I was doing a lot of roundabout miles to avoid the tunnels. There'd be a 5-kilometer tunnel through a mountain and a 25-kilometer dirt road detour through a pass. And I would take the pass maybe 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
Which actually were some of my favorite experiences, if I'm being honest. It was incredible. But
would have been more beautiful, slow. I guess, and
so
slower, beautiful. But more beautiful and less chance of getting rammed by a truck going through a tunnel or whatever.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's pretty intense. A few weeks after I had ridden through, maybe 2 weeks after, I think he was 27 German bikepacker was killed in one of the tunnels that I had actually ridden through.
Wow.
And it was like, wow, yeah, it solidified the don't take unnecessary risks for me.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I rode up into Georgia. Georgia was incredible. from Batumi into the lower Caucasus and through the Caucasus to Tbilisi. The original plan was to ride through Azerbaijan and then there's a ferry, which mostly does luggage, but you can also just ride your bike on. It's going to take that across the Caspian Sea, but Azerbaijan's border was closed, and it's still closed. So I flew from Tbilisi to Aktau, had a bit of a layover in Istanbul on the way, but not particularly interesting. I flew from Tbilisi to Aktau. Actually, that's not entirely true. Well, I ended up spending during that layover, I got sick, spent a couple weeks in Istanbul, which was a really nice experience, but just wasn't riding. And so the next time I picked up the riding was in Aktau, Kazakhstan, on the other side of the Caspian Sea, because the ferry wasn't running. And that was, in many ways, the meat and potatoes of the ride, and the part of the ride I was most looking forward to beforehand.
Okay. Why was that?
It just felt, well, a few reasons. One, I'd read this book. Alistair Humphreys wrote this great book called Moods of Future Joys about riding around the world. And reading his section on Central Asia sounded incredible. And there's lots of just books on adventuring in Central Asia. And it just seems like such the heart of that spirit for humanity, if you will. Going back to, was it Marco Polo who wrote The Golden Road to Samarkand, which is a poem about the Silk Road. And the Silk Road has just been traveled by so many different cultures and so many different people for so long.
Yeah. And so much history there.
Exactly. And so to be on the Silk Road, like a traveler on the Silk Road, felt like this romantic ideal of an adventure. And so I headed out from Aktau out into the Mangistau region of the Kazakh steppe, and was out in the grasslands, and the desert, and then the grasslands, and it was just mind-blowing. Just so wild. I remember the first night I'd ridden out this kind of main road, but then I'd gone down this dirt road for 200-kilometer detour. Well, it wasn't a detour for me, but a detour away from the main road. Mm-hmm. And the dirt road had been washed out completely, and so a car couldn't access it. And so I was totally and utterly alone, and I knew it. And it was this crazy feeling of, it's probably been a year since this road has been open, and how many people were driving it beforehand? Probably not many. How many tires have ever been here? Yeah. And that was an amazing feeling. So I rode out this dirt road out into the Kazakh steppe and had a really just phenomenal experience there.
It's such a powerful feeling being somewhere where, one, not many people have been, but where not many people are in that moment, and just being fully self-reliant as well. That's just, it's such a raw thing. And I feel
totally.
Yeah, I get that so much on trail, and that's probably what keeps me bringing me back, because it's it's a little scary and a little challenging, which I think you need, and then it's just so awe-inspiring, and so the solitude is just so so epic, and you would have experienced that to the highest degree.
Yeah. Do you feel like you felt that more so in kind of the big wide open places, like in the desert of California or in Oregon, or more so in the high mountains?
I definitely didn't. I don't think I had that feeling as much on the PCT, because it's such a
that makes sense.
High traffic trail. There's people everywhere, but the through hike I did before that across New Zealand, I started late into the season, and I walked opposite to most people, and I was solo for 3 full months, where I didn't see people for multiple days in a row out in the backcountry. And I think I got that feeling there a lot when I'm just
that makes sense.
Out in the mountains. It's 3 days of hiking either way to get to even the smallest little town. And I'm just it's just me and nature and whatever I've got in my back. And that is just such a powerful thing. And I definitely, I crave that feeling. Whereas on the PCT, there wasn't many days where I didn't see someone. So I didn't quite get that sort of sense of solitude. But how long were you, so in the Kazakh steppe, that area, how long were you alone for?
That's a good question. I felt like I was alone for months and months and months, to be honest.
Yeah.
But because there was pretty much a couple months where no one spoke English.
True. Yeah.
And so that was a unique side of being alone. But I ask about your experience because I had assumed that I would feel that solitude. I felt that in the mountains before.
Mm-hmm.
And the desert was that times 10. Because you can just look so far and you just don't see anything. You don't see anyone. It's the camel to people ratio is like 1,000 to 1.
Right.
And that's because there's 1,000 camels and I'm the only one, you know?
Yeah.
And that was just incredible. I remember there was these power lines and I could see them. I'd ridden along the access road for a bit and I could still see them in the knew it had taken me like 3 hours to ride to this hilltop. And that was the only sign of civilization I could see in that one direction. And then you turn around, you don't see anything the other direction. Then this track through the sand. And yes, I rode that for a couple days until I picked up the pavement again. Had a lovely experience I'd met this guy on Warm Showers, which is like a bike touring site. And he had connected me with someone from like the local mosque in this small town of Shutpe in Kazakhstan. And I think it was Shutpe. They had like let me sleep in the mosque that night. And I stayed a day there because I had like a sore throat from the sand. And so I spent a day in the mosque in Shutpe and then rode out again back onto the desert, but on pavement this time. And that was just amazing as well. Because like you were saying, when you're on those long paved roads, you can just cover so much distance. And that was wild. Just heading deeper and deeper and deeper into the steppe, reached the Uzbekistan border. Had a pretty engaging experience at the border because no one spoke English and they were like dumping out my bags and like going through all my stuff. And this one person like knew the word spy. And so it was like spy, spy, spy. And I was like, oh, tourist. And they like put me in this like cell basically. It was like no windows or anything and like locked the door. And I had to wait for a pretty long time for someone who spoke English to come. And then they were going through like my photos and like timestamps on my photos and the stamps in my passport to like make sure I was actually like my passport stamps weren't fake.
Your story checked out.
Yeah. And then headed back into the desert away from the border town. And that was even more so. That was even more remote because it was less remote in some ways because it's a truck route. And so I could see cars and stuff. I saw cars on the pavement as well, but one every like hour. But there's no road from that border point to the cities in Uzbekistan, which is like 2,000 kilometers. What is 1,000 miles? 1,600 kilometers? Something in that range to the next city. But there's no road that goes there. It's just like empty desert. And so trucks just like drive across the desert. And so the trucks form these tracks. It's all these like braided sand tracks, like 20 wide through the desert. And so you're just like, and sometimes the trucks would like rut it out. So you couldn't really I couldn't ride my bike on them. And that felt crazy. Because at one point I decided to like go away from the truck tracks, but it's pretty firm dirt. It's like a sand, but it's firm and kind of grassy. And I was just like riding in this desert, like literally by compass on my way to Bukhara, Uzbekistan. And it was totally mind blowing. And then actually there is a road under construction, which was kind of cool as well, because it's not like the cars can't drive on it, but you can bike on it. And so you're just on this like post-apocalyptic highway. And that was just incredible as well, and a lot faster. But yeah, amazing experience, like pull up off the side of I
was going to say, it sounds like this sort of area in Central Asia lived up to the expectations you had. Like you were so looking forward to it, and it was just epic.
Oh yeah, it was totally what I expected. The thing I underestimated was the food. I really struggled a bit just because it's a different diet and there's just different stuff in the food than what we're used to eating, or at least in America. And I struggled with some of the food. I was pretty sick. Don't need to go into any details there, but I did not feel very good. Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it was totally wild. My favorite example of it was I was camping this one night. I camped most nights in there because you just go off into the desert and set up your tent. And it had been a bit of a snow, like just a tiny snow and then like a heavy frost. And I woke up in the morning, like right around sunrise, and I was looking at like the snow on the ground, and I was pretty tired. And I was like, I'm going to go back to sleep and like let the sun come up and melt everything. And maybe 45 minutes later, I hear footsteps, like the crunching, this distinct noise of a footstep on frozen ground. And I was just like, oh crap, like this is bad. Like someone's out here, like this is really bad. And then I thought about it for a few more seconds. That was just my initial reaction upon waking up. And I thought about it for a few more seconds. My brain actually went to, oh, actually, they're probably just here to like see if I'm okay. But what I didn't expect is what actually was happening. And so I unzipped the tent to see who the people were. And rather than people, there was a herd of like 40 camels.
Oh, wow.
Surrounding my tent.
Like wild camels?
Wild camels, yeah.
They're like, we haven't seen this out here. Yeah. What's going on?
And there was just this camel looking at me. And I remember thinking like, have I died? Like, is this like purgatory? Is this what the afterlife is? Like, there's no way this is happening right now. And I had to like a real hallucination experience with myself where I was like trying to figure out if what I was experiencing was real or not. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And that was like all of Central Asia was like that. It was just a dream.
Incredible. Would you say that was the highlight of the trip? Sort of that section?
In many ways, I guess. It's like all of these things. Like it was also kind of the low light in some ways because about a week later, I was riding on like the paved road toward Bukhara, and I got hit by a car.
Okay.
And that was really intense. It was not fun at all. But overall, I'd say Central Asia was probably it was the most meaningful for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it was incredible. In terms of like pure highlights, Slovenia and Georgia were like there's my hand gesture I just did isn't very helpful for audio listeners here, but
they were high highlights.
It was the best. Yeah, those were the highlights where it felt wild and remote and not easy, but just so fun. Central Asia was a lot of that type too, but also a lot of just beauty. Like I was just like enamored by the whole experience the whole time.
Type 2 fun's the best. The stuff that you can look back on and you can tell the stories with a smile on your face, even if it was a bit crappy in the moment. So you got hit by a car. Yeah. Speaking of type 2 fun, you got hit by a car. Were you and the bike okay? And what was next?
Yeah,
Southeast
Asia?
Broke
the bottom end of my handlebar, and I couldn't feel my left hand for about a week.
Oh, crap. Okay.
I got hit like kind of in the back of the arm, kind of like glanced off like the underside of my like ribs, kind of. Smashed the dude's mirror with my like lats basically, but thankfully he wasn't 3 centimeters further right, because then he would have clipped like the bag, and that would have like flung me forward at like highway speed. I actually didn't end up crashing really. I kind of bounced off and then bounced because he hit the handlebar, it like flung the bars to the right, but I kind of drove back left and ended up like bouncing off the side of the car again. But because the car was there, it kind of kept me upright. And I kind of like lost my footing, but like went off into the dirt. And the reason he hit me was that he like lost his lane and like drifted over into the dirt as well. But
type 2 fun, hey?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, that's one of those where you look back on it and you're like, wow, I really hope that just like never happens again in my life. Like maybe I don't need to ride on the roads anymore. But yeah, no, from there was actually a really amazing experience. Bukhara, Samarkand, incredible places, historic on just another level, particularly as an American. You go to the Registan at Samarkand, and it's been an active trading post for like 3,000 years. It's just wild. And where to go from there? Then I went up into the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan. I was having some visa issues. Some borders were closed. I couldn't get a visa and permit to cross into Kyrgyzstan. Well, I could get the Kyrgyz visa, but I needed a certain permit from Tajikistan to use the highway to ride through this like military region. Wow. And the border between Tajikistan and China was closed, so I ran out a bit of options, but like we were talking about earlier, I wanted to keep, the point of the trip wasn't to, maybe it's coming from like this alpinism background, but like everything in alpinism has asterisks. And so I was pretty okay with making changes. And so I flew
We had to
from
adapt, didn't you? So yeah, you were
totally.
just being adaptable.
Exactly, as much as I could, yeah. So I flew from Tajikistan, from Dushanbe, Boulder's sister city, which is beautiful up high in the mountains. Amazing experience up in the mountains of Tajikistan. Flew out of there to Delhi and rode across India and Nepal. Had an amazing experience in India and Nepal. India was really intense, but I look back on it quite fondly. Like I'm glad I did it, even though it's maybe not like the best place for bikepacking, as it's quite scary. Pretty intense on the roads.
A lot of traffic and a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of traffic, a lot of people, and rules that are different than ours in terms of behavior on the road. So I was always worried if me probably 10 or 15 times, I'd be riding behind like a tuk-tuk, and all of a sudden they would swerve out of the way because someone was coming like the wrong way up the road. And then all of a sudden you're about to be in like a head-on collision. So you swerve out of the way and then hope no one's next to you. And it was pretty intense.
That was just like a normal part of the roads.
Totally. And there's like locals riding bikes and stuff. It was incredible.
Wow.
I was like, man, maybe I'm just like a wuss here. Like maybe my brain doesn't work fast enough. But yeah, that was pretty cool. Nepal was incredible, riding up to the Himalaya. Had a pretty gnarly section in Western Nepal. Their largest tiger population in the world is there, Bengal tigers. And I knew that a woman had been killed like right before I was there on a motorcycle. Like a tiger like swiped her off the back of a motorcycle. And I think it's like the most fundamental thing in human nature to be afraid of being eaten by a tiger, I guess.
I think you can be forgiven for having that fear, yes.
I was very scared. But there's a section of the park where you're not allowed to ride a bicycle through anyway. And at the time, I like pretended. I was like, oh man, I'm so bummed. Like I can't ride, but secretly I was really psyched.
Well, that worked out perfectly.
Exactly. I was like, I'll let the park rangers make the wise decision. I contacted a local lodge, told them what I was doing, booked a couple nights stay with them, and I booked a safari with them so I'd get to see the jungle, and that was a lovely experience. And they came and picked me up with a Jeep. But the next day I was chatting with like a local guide, and he was like, oh, like where did our Jeep pick you up? And I told him at the edge of the park. He's like, oh, so you flew in? I was like, no, like I rode my bike in. He's like, from India? And I was like, yeah. He's like, from Bimdada? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, very brave. I was like, what do you mean very brave? Like the tigers are this way. And apparently, like almost a year ago to the day from when I was there, 2 cyclists had been like killed and eaten by a tiger on the road that I had like ridden there. And that was one of those where you just get a bit goosebumpy. But we avoided being eaten by a tiger, which was I'm rather pleased about not being eaten by the tiger.
Yeah.
I got to see a leopard,
intense.
and that was cool. But yeah.
I'm just imagining everywhere you went, there was probably locals who had a similar reaction to that guy. Where it's like, wait, what are you doing? Where have you come from? Like, wait, how did you get to this point? You know, like people were like just blown away by the grandiose of the adventure.
Yeah. So yeah, it was one of those where like you never know if someone's like overreacting. It's just they're not used to it, or if they're like legitimately concerned for your well-being. Everyone's concerned for your well-being, but yeah. So
it's the kind of thing where you become desensitized to what you're doing as well. You know, you're riding 100 miles a day through all these crazy places. You've been through so much, you know, on the bike, not to mention on the boat and all these other things in your life. And you're like, yeah, it's just another day adventuring, you know, around the world. Whereas these people who haven't seen that before are just like, what is happening? What is this guy doing?
Yeah, for sure. Which is nice as well, because people want to take care of you and help you out. I got invited into like so many people's homes and mosques.
Yeah.
And slept in some very weird places, but yeah.
It's the
Um,
kind of people are just so generous, aren't they? I think the more
yeah,
I travel,
totally.
the more I do these different adventures, the more I realize how nice just the average person is. Everyone just wants to help their fellow human. Um,
Yeah, totally.
it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, from there I went up into the Himalaya. Couldn't enter Myanmar, so I flew to Hanoi, and then yeah, I'm sure if we've got enough time to really get into it, but got pretty sick there with
Yeah.
what
Well, when
ended up
you
being.
arrived to Perth after a few months, however long it was riding through Southeast Asia, you were in pretty bad shape. And I'd been following you pretty closely. You're putting stories up all the time, giving us updates on this like mystery. It was like a mystery sickness for a while there, right? So, what did it end up being, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I ended up in Perth getting diagnosed with an endemic typhus or an Asian typhus. Typhus is quite rare nowadays. It's mostly been eradicated, but it comes from a number of different things you can get it from. We think I got it from a tick, but you can also get it from a flea or a mosquito. It's quite kind of similar actually to like a malaria, but it can have a little bit more like long lasting effects. Although I think malaria can have that as well. I'm not a medical professional, but yeah. So I spent a couple weeks in hospital in Hanoi, or in and out of hospital, because we just couldn't get my fever to break. And then one day I'd gone into like a travel clinic. They told me to go to the hospital. I'm at the hospital and I coughed, and I just like coughed up this like dark red blood like into my lap with like this Vietnamese nurse standing there, and they were just like wide eyed, and that was pretty
Yeah.
intense. I remember, I remember having this pretty distinct thought of like figuring out how I was gonna like tell my parents that I was like coughing up blood in a hospital in Vietnam, and then I was like, no one needs to know. um,
But tell them when I get home. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. But no, then it ended up being kind of fine. They gave me medication, got the fever to break. I was diagnosed with dengue fever at the time, but I was blood testing negative for it. So I didn't really know what to believe. And all the blood work and stuff was in Vietnamese, and I couldn't figure out how to translate it. And at that point, I kind of had a decision to make, but I was feeling better after a few weeks. And so I decided just to send it to Singapore. And the first few weeks were good. First couple weeks were good. Rode through a lot lower miles, 40 miles a day. But rode through Vietnam, had an amazing experience. Vietnam's incredible. Everyone was super kind. Remember riding out of Hanoi, I stopped to buy some water at a shop. And this woman saw my touring bike, and she handed me these like dried like washcloths. They've got like an antiseptic in them. And so you just add a little bit of water and it becomes like a wet wipe, but you don't have to carry the weight of a wet wipe. And she handed me like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
bucket of them and like wouldn't take any money for them. And just
Yeah.
lots of
Right.
experiences like that. Staying at like really beautiful like resorts. Stayed at this properly 5-star resort. People bring your breakfast to your bungalow on the beach type place. But it was during the rainy season. So I was the only one there. It cost like
Right.
$18.
Whoa.
It was amazing. And so, yeah, a lot of that. Rode up into Laos, met this really cool German guy, Sebastian, on the road into Laos. And we cycled across Laos together and had an amazing experience in Laos, and rode through Thailand, through Northeast Thailand, through Siam, and then through Bangkok, left Bangkok, down the east coast of Thailand, skipping lots of cool things that happened along the way. But I was leaving the east coast of Thailand, making the jump to the west coast, which is a lot more populated, where Phuket is and Krabi, which a lot of people go to visit from Australia and America. A lot of people fly over.
Yeah.
And I was at this small kind of homestay, this family's house. They just had 2 rooms basically. And I remember I was feeling quite weird, just weird. My body felt weird. My joints felt weird. My skin felt weird. So, maybe I was tired. Like, I'm going to walk down to the 7-Eleven, which is like the 7-Elevens in Thailand are next level. And
Yeah. I've been to Thailand. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's
So,
pretty amazing.
they're really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. The toasties. Oh, so good. But yeah, I walked there, walked back, went to like sit in my room, and I was sitting on the bed, and the whole room was just like waving around. And then I got this black spot kind of in the bottom of my vision, and my vision started just like going away from the bottom up. And at that point, I actually thought what had happened was I was going into shock, I thought that I had not had enough salt and I'd sweated so much. Plus, I had like this sunburn that had blistered. And I thought
Yeah.
because of all of that, maybe I was going into shock from salt loss. But I wasn't really thinking very well, super brain foggy. And then I realized I was in proper trouble because I tried to Google hospital and I like couldn't rationalize how to find out where a hospital was. And so then I kind of put things in motion to message like Global Rescue, which is a service I had, and they've got doctors and stuff. They put me in touch with the American doctor who I talked to on the phone. The American doctor was like, yeah, you need to go to the hospital right now. And so then they spoke to the family I was staying with for me, kind of trying to explain the situation, but the family didn't speak any English. Eventually, the mom realized, like, this kid is, like, actually, like, dying in our room right now. And so they took me to this hospital. Somewhat unfortunately, I was expecting, like, a large hospital. It was, like, a small open-air clinic with, like, no doors or anything. And I remember, one of the last things I remember from that evening was, like, sitting down in this, like, gurney. And there was, like, lizards on the wall. And I was like, oh, I'm going to die for sure. And I don't remember anything else from, like, the rest of that night.
Did you pass out, or was it just like a blur?
No, I like blacked out, I think.
Wow.
Although I don't remember. Like, I just don't remember. I just remember
so this was the
lizards
typhus kind of rearing its head again.
Yeah, so what it seems like, and again, we're still not 100% sure, is a lot of these diseases and a lot of somewhat like concussions and stuff as well, their neurological symptoms kind of hit like a few weeks after the illness is over if you don't like treat it fully. And so probably what was happening. I woke up the next morning and it's one of those things where it's weird having such a distinct memory of like certain moments. But I remember I have like such a clear picture of like waking up in the morning and the mom was like still there, like hadn't sat down, like had just been standing next to me like this entire night, which felt really comforting. Actually, it was very nice. They're just the best. Didn't speak any English, couldn't communicate with them, but I remember looking up and she was there, and I was like, "Oh, that's nice." And then being like, "Holy crap! Like I'm alive! Like this is crazy." And then the mom took me back to their place. They cooked me breakfast. I sat on their porch, and then they came and like brought me tea and coffee and like checked in on me throughout the day. They like let me stay there another couple nights. Then I had this decision of, do I go home and this ride is over, or do I press on? And that was intense because I was not feeling well, but I wasn't feeling as bad as I was that night. And I just had this thought of, the two thoughts were, if I'm like actually gonna like die, there's probably gonna be a bit of warning. Like I'll get worse. And I was going into a lot more populated region. Like I'd already done the remote section. And so if anything, I was putting myself in a better position than I was in currently.
Mm-hmm.
And really I had this thought of like, if the multiverse exists, I am unwilling to not be like the version of this story where I finish this ride. Like it was just not acceptable to me. If I had a chance to finish this, then I was taking it. And then I set off for Singapore.
It sounds like you obviously really wanted to finish and you were just trying to justify that in any way possible.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But yeah, that was a pretty intense period in my life for sure, mentally. Yeah. Because I couldn't really eat.
I just remember looking at your stories that you'd post every now and then, and it just did not seem like you were in good shape at all, and you just kept pushing, and then you'd have to stop for a few days, and I remember watching and just being blown away that you were somehow inching forward still, and I guess eventually you got to Australia, and less open air medical centers and some better sort of infrastructure here, which probably helped.
Yeah, and then I got to Australia, and it turns out you guys actually have great healthcare. As an American, I was blown away.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, it was great. Got to Perth, hung out with you by the beach, and it cured me.
I'm glad to play a part in your healing a
Yeah,
coffee
no, that
at,
was
I think it's at Cottesloe Beach, which is just, beautiful spot.
yeah, it was
Did the
so
job for you.
nice. Yeah, and then and then I was in Australia. Actually, a real highlight of my trip was going with you to the rave at like 5 a.m. on the beach.
Right.
That was
Yes.
so fun.
We have this weekly community event in Perth called Cold Nips, where we every Wednesday morning we go down and we do a sunrise, swim in the ocean, then have coffee and hang out afterwards. Sometimes there's like 1,000 people there. It's crazy. But yeah, they do these sunrise rave things every now and then. There's actually one a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, I remember doing that with you. That was so much fun.
Yeah, so fun. But yeah, then from that point, adjusted my plans. I just wanted to get home and have a nice experience on the rest of my
Yeah.
ride. So I was going to ride across the outback, canceled that on the request of my doctor in Perth, and
Yeah.
ended up riding up the east coast of Australia instead. Spent a couple months in Perth recovering, felt 70% better. Rode up the east
Hmm.
coast of Australia, flew to LA, still pretty sick, but rode from LA back to Boulder with my dad drove. My dad flew out to LA, and we rented a car, and so I had a bit of support there, which was really nice because it's very remote, and that allowed me to do a different route because water carries like 500 miles on a bike are not fun. Which is
Yeah.
kind of
Wow.
two separate long water carries. Man, maybe like 300 miles. But anyway, would have not been that sweet.
You would have had to probably do some similar water carries if you rode across the outback in Australia, right? So riding the east coast where there's, constant population centers would have been a lot easier, less stressful, and that kind of thing.
Oh, totally. Going across to Nullarbor, there are the roadhouses about every 100 miles, but it still
Okay.
would, it would super full on. But yeah, back
Yeah, yeah.
across the Americas, had one final kind of test when, as I rode into Colorado, we got this massive blizzard. And so for my
I
final,
remember seeing you
even
put up you put up some videos of you like riding in the snow towards the end. I was like, really? Just let him get home.
yeah, and that was really fun. I had to cancel a little bit of my plans there as well because I was going to ride over this thing called Loveland Pass, but the easier way is just through this tunnel, but
Okay.
it snowed like 15 centimeters, so I wasn't going to ride over the pass. So I just like got in my dad's car and we drove through the tunnel, which people say I've been forgiven for, but I'm going to go back and
Yeah.
ride it this summer, ride over the
Okay.
pass. But yeah, it's funny. Even until like 4 hours before I finished, I called the owner of Full Cycle who was setting up like this finish event for me. Literally 4 hours before I finished the day I finished. And I was like, Russ, I'm not going to make it. Like, I'm not going to finish this ride. And
Yeah.
he was very understanding. He was like, well, do what you can do. But it was just like so much snow. And there's photos on my Instagram. Like, my beard was just like caked with snow. I was so
Yeah.
cold.
It's kind of fitting,
But we
to be
did
honest,
it.
because the day you left, right, it was intense and the storms were crazy, and then the day you
Yeah.
finish, a similar thing with the snow. And so, close to home, start and end, it was a test, and that was probably a bit of a theme throughout the journey. But dude, what an incredible adventure!
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I just feel really lucky. I feel just like so privileged to have had the opportunity to like, it's such a blessing to be able to like have this like dream. Like so many people have big dreams and to have the resources and support to actually give it a try was
Yeah,
special for sure.
yeah. I mean, it's to do this, you needed that support, but you also, mate, you did that. Like you did that. Your legs and your body and your bike, you freaking crossed the globe. So give yourself, all the credit. That's super inspiring. Do you feel like you learned a lot about yourself during that 16-month journey?
Oh, so much. This is kind of a weird takeaway potentially, but is one of the things that I feel most significant. A lot of the people that I think are uplifted in the adventure sports world, 100% because they should be. Like, to use an example, like David Goggins is like an incredible athlete, an incredible person. And a lot of those types of people have a certain mindset that allows them to achieve amazing things. They're just so disciplined. They're so tough.
Yeah.
And they preach that discipline, and it allows people to do amazing things. I am not a like tough or gritty person. I think that being uncomfortable, it just like doesn't bother me at all. Like I just don't mind it, which I think is helpful. And I guess you could call that grit. But the discipline thing for me just doesn't work. I tried being disciplined, and being disciplined can get you far. But reverting back to just like seeking joy and like seeking fun and like laughing about it, I felt like just raised my ceiling so much. Like when I needed to get up in the morning and go ride like 100 miles, when I relied on discipline, I found mornings really hard because I'm definitely more of a late night person. But when instead of thinking to myself and speaking to myself in a way of like, come on, Chris, like you have to get up right now. Like you're being lazy, you're being weak. Like you have to be strong and disciplined. Like you have to get up. That just put me in a bad position relative to when I thought to myself, like, man, I'm going to get up and I'm going to have like so much fun today. And I'm going to have so many cool experiences. And maybe I should, what should I do today? I should go to the store on my way out, and I should buy like some bags of gummy bears. And then at some point during the day, I'm going to find some kids like playing soccer on the street, and we're going to like share these gummy bears, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And then I would go into the day like so excited, and it led to, I just had more fun, but also B, it's how I got around the whole world. Like I could not have done it relying on discipline, but relying on seeking joy really helped me. And I'm trying to.
I think that's
yeah.
That's such a powerful realization. I think everyone's different, right? Some people do really respond to discipline and a bit of harsh self-talk, but some people just don't. And
totally, yeah,
it's that thing where it's like, you get to do this, not you have to do this. That little switch in wording and mindset is like, no, today's going to be epic. And I, like you said, I'm super privileged to be in the position where I can go do this thing that's going to be hard, yeah, but it's going to be a lot of fun as well. Not like I have to do it, like someone's forcing me to, or whatever it is. And that's profound, man. That's really profound.
Yeah, it was. I feel lucky to have had the opportunity to learn those things for sure. Also, learning that like riding bikes is really fun. Like my psych for riding bikes was really high before I left, obviously, and then it just grew. It grew throughout the whole trip, and now I'm even more psyched on bike packing than when I left, which is pretty nice.
Well, the problem with doing these insane adventures is like, how do you top it now? Like, what can you possibly do now that's going to be better or like more fulfilling than what you've already done? I feel like that a little bit with the Pacific Crest Trail, because I feel like that's the pinnacle of through hiking on planet Earth. And it's like, well, now every hike I do is going to be, it's going to be less than. And that's a little bit sad, but I mean, you can enjoy adventures in different ways and take things from different experiences. So what's next for you? Do you have any plans for any other big adventures? And what's going on with you?
Dude, what's next? I'm gonna reorganize my bedroom. I think that's next on the list right now.
Baby steps.
I do have some other adventure ideas, particularly things that involve more other people. I love spending time with people, and I did get to have amazing experiences with people on this ride, but I want to go back to doing stuff. When I think back to the row, I think of amazing experiences with Ray and Ryan, and I want to be able to do that with other things in the future. Also places. I kind of knew this before I left, but the world feels bigger now in many ways, and there's places I want to go back to for other expeditions and stuff. Like I'd love to go back to Tajikistan for sure, particularly on a ski trip, and get to experience that from that perspective. And but no, nothing concrete right now.
That's the other thing about traveling and doing these adventures, especially meeting people, is like your like bucket list grows and the world gets bigger. Like you said, the more you see, the more there is to see, and the more people you meet, the more incredible experiences and adventures you hear about other people doing. And it's like, damn, It's really endless. Like there's endless opportunity to get out there and experience the world and experience outside, which is a really powerful thing. And man, thanks so much for sharing your story.
Dude, thank you.
You've
Thanks for having
inspired
me.
me, and yeah, I'm glad I got a bit more context into the bike trip and everything that came before as well, man. It's just like it just makes me want to go outside, like, and do something right now. It's super cool.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, thanks for having me, Cam. It's nice to chat with you. I'm sure we'll chat sometime soon again. But
Of course, of course. Where can people
yeah,
follow you before we jump off? Where can people follow the adventures?
yeah, I'm on Instagram at Chris in the Cold. I've been taking a bit of a break since I finished my ride, but gonna get back to posting a bit, and you can see a lot more ski touring and ice climbing and bike packing and stuff on there. And yeah, that's definitely the main place.
Unreal. And you can scroll back and you can sort of see a lot of the adventures that we've talked about today as well, which is really cool. You've got a whole range of like reels and photos and kind of stuff from the big bike trip. So go check out Chris on Instagram, follow what he's up to in the future. I'm excited to do the same. And if you guys enjoyed this episode of the Life Outside podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star rating, follow the show, comment below, all of that good stuff. And we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.